Uh, Originally, my original place is Macon, Georgia. Is where I was born, but I only lived there for 8 months. So it's not really the original place. I'm originally from Winter Haven, Florida. So I lived about, I don't know, 5, 10 minutes from what was Cypress Gardens, but it's now Legoland, which is just different. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I used to work at Cypress Gardens in the summers. So the botanical gardens and all that. Absolutely, it was gorgeous. I actually haven't been back since it became Legoland. So, but I hear that it's fun. So, what do you think? Should I get started or what's my time frame? It's like 9 to 10ish, right? Okay.
It's 9:05 to around 10.
Okay.
You can start or we can wait 5 minutes. It's up to you.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
It doesn't
Okay.
matter for, you know.
We'll give it a few minutes.
The big thing is we remembered to come.
That's always a good thing. And the fact that you still have a good sense of humor, that's always a plus too.
Good.
Oh.
So do you work with Alzheimer's patients or you're,
I used to.
oh, okay.
I'll just go ahead and get started. Because that's part of my intro.
Oh,
Um,
well, that's all right. We can wait.
no, you're fine. So, like it says, my name is James Smith. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I currently work for 211 Big Ben, which is a 24/7 short-term crisis counseling and information and referral hotline. And so we provide assistance to individuals who need assistance with anything from depression to utility assistance, rent assistance, anything and everything. And we serve 8 counties in the North Florida region. I used to, as I mentioned, work at the Alzheimer's Project, which is a local nonprofit organization that provides information and resources for families that are battling Alzheimer's disease. So I worked there for about 7 years, started at the very lowest, basically as an intern, and then was the outreach and education coordinator, providing trainings on Alzheimer's disease. And then just before I left, I was the clinical director for the program. So yeah, so it's been about a year actually since I've done a presentation, but Cindy Lavoie, who is a parishioner here, knew that I used to work at the Alzheimer's Project and asked if I still had information, and it's still up there. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. And so basically what I wanted to go through today, what they asked me to go through, is to talk about Alzheimer's disease, what it is, what it isn't, and talk about a little bit of behavior modification in the realms of a Catholic perspective as well. So I'm also a parishioner over at St. Thomas More. I've been a parishioner there since 2002 when I came up here for school at FSU, and just kind of transplanted and made it my home. So,
Great.
uh-oh. Is this going to work? Guess not. Oh, there we go. Just got to be close. So again, we're going to distinguish the difference between normal aging and memory loss due to Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. That's what the A.R.C stands for. We'll talk about how the brain works and how Alzheimer's can affect the brain, identify some characteristics and related dementias, and learn steps to communicate with clients diagnosed with Alzheimer's throughout the different stages. All right. All right. So, pop quiz. Didn't know that you were going to get quiz this morning, did you? Is there a difference between Alzheimer's disease and normal aging?
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah.
Don't know. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. So we're doing a pop quiz. Yeah, what's your answer? Yes. Okay, well, We have at least one person with 100, so that's a good. So yes, there is a difference between normal aging and dementia. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. So, forgetfulness due to aging or increased stress is not necessarily dementia, and in many cases it is normal. So as we age, our brain, our bodies don't work as well as they used to. It takes time for our brains to be able to remember things that it's stored away for years and years and years. That's why I can remember faces, but not always necessarily names. Like for you guys' example, I can remember your faces, I just can't recall your names at the moment. The ability to retain and store information in our memories changes as we age. Our cognition remains clearer. Thoughts sometimes take more time to process. Like I mentioned, it just takes a little bit longer. It's said that our brains are at its highest capacity for learning and remembering at the ripe old age of 24. So after 24, our brains are just kind of there logging information and trying to process the information as quickly as it can. Also, as people age normally, they can still provide self-care. So they can still do things for themselves. They can still bathe themselves, dress themselves, without requiring the assistance of someone else or even the reminders of someone else. Yes, sometimes my wife has to remind me, you got to go brush your teeth. But most of the time, I'm able to do that by myself. When we start talking about dementia, the word dementia itself is not a disease. It's an umbrella term for the loss of intellectual functioning, such as thinking and reasoning, to such a severe point that a person can't provide assistance to themselves on a daily basis. So again, it's more of an umbrella term as opposed to a disease in itself. So much like the word cancer, there are many different types of cancers. There are many different types of dementias. Some dementias can be treated and reversed. However, most dementias are untreatable and irreversible. And Alzheimer's disease is the most commonly diagnosed form of dementia, and it is unreversible at this time. Any questions at this point? All right. And if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to ask. So people with memory loss due to Alzheimer's disease will gradually lose the ability to think and reason. One of the first areas that families kind of start seeing this is if someone's been taking care of the bills all the time, and then all of a sudden, the utilities are cut off, or the car's being repossessed, or any number of things that because that person has forgotten the things that they need to do. Another area where we see thinking and reasoning is in driving. Driving inherently is pretty much all thinking and reasoning. As we're driving down the road, we have to remember, one, where we're going. That's always a good thing. We have to remember the speed limit. We have to remember the rules of the road. We have to remember to use our blinker. We have to remember that as we approach a light, if it turns from green to yellow, we have to think and reason that it's going to turn to red, so we have to think and reason to move our foot from the gas pedal to the brake, or to apply more pressure to the gas pedal to get through a little bit quicker. So it all it's all intertwined, thinking and reasoning. Individuals with Alzheimer's that inevitably will need assistance with everyday activities such as dressing, bathing, toileting, and other activities of daily living. So as their disease progresses, they'll need more and more assistance, starting from just gentle reminders to do things to actually requiring the assistance to dress themselves, to bathe themselves, to feed themselves. We also sometimes see changes in personality and mood are two common symptoms of dementia, where oftentimes you'll hear families say, my dad, my mom, they were fantastic people. They went to church every Sunday. They never said a bad word in their lives. They were great, fantastic people. And now all of a sudden, he doesn't care about church. He's cursing every other word like a sailor, and he's just this person that I don't recognize anymore. That's more of it's not normal to see that. More often we'll see more of a magnification of previous personalities. So much the nice, sweet person becomes that much more nice, that much more sweet, and very easy to work with. And the mean and angry person becomes that much more mean, that much more angry, and that much more ornery and difficult to work with from time to time. Does that make sense? Okay. So, how does the brain work? This is just a very, very brief biology assessment. So, the brain contains cells called neurons, and it communicates when an electrical impulse moves from the neuron cell body down an axon. And it sends neurochemicals which act like messengers and travel across a synapse to trigger another neuron to send a message. Does that bring you back to high school? Goodness gracious, right? Some of these words I don't even remember what they mean, right? So the messages go throughout our body and tell our body what to do, and the messages work for our different senses, telling our heart to pump, our eyes to blink, so on and so forth. So our brain is kind of our central computer, right? It's our CPU, our motherboard. And it helps our it helps our body regulate anything and everything that it needs to do. It helps you guys to be able to stay awake at this very early morning. It helps you to regulate your body temperature so that you're not too hot, too cold, especially with this wonderful new weather that we have out. At least I think it's weather that's wonderful. It also, controls the things that we don't necessarily can control. It controls our heart. It controls our breathing. It controls our digestive system. It controls everything. And so basically what happens, again, this is our in between the synapses, and it's sending out those neurotransmitters, trying to send messages telling our body to do something. And so what happens when Alzheimer's disease affects the brain, those synapses, those neurotransmitters have a difficulty getting their message across because the neurotransmitter is basically blocked and it shrivels up and dies. So it's basically your brain starting to die. So we have gradual death of brain tissue due to biochemical problems. Patches of brain cells degenerate and become neurotic plaques. And the nerve endings that transmit the messages become tangled, which are called the neurofibrillary tangles. There's a reduction in acetylcholine, which is an important brain chemical. Spaces in the brain develop, ventricles become larger and filled with granular fluid. And we can literally see that the size and the shape of the brain changes. So again, we have kind of three main features. We have the plaques and the tangles, which are kind of the leading thought processes of what Alzheimer's disease is. And then we also have loss of brain cell connections and communication, causing more cell death. Here we have a picture of two brains. So the brain on the left is basically, if you Google searched or a picture of brain, this is kind of what would come up. It's got that pink appearance, and it looks basically what you would think of as a brain. Whereas the brain on the right is that of an Alzheimer's patient. And we can again see that the size and the shape of the brain have severely changed. And we can again see that there's significant holes where the brain used to be large and plump. It has literally shrunk and decayed because again, the brain is not able to send out messages in that area. And so the brain basically says, okay, you don't need me anymore, so I'm just going to pull away and not work. So that's kind of how Alzheimer's affects the brain. Of course, the clicker stops working. All right, here we have an image of two PET scans. What we generally look for on PET scan is the bright colors, the oranges, reds, and yellows, which generally will signify higher activities of brain function in the area. The brain on the right is that of a normal person who's not experiencing any cognitive declines. Whereas the brain on the left, again, we see that of an Alzheimer's patient, and we see significantly fewer amounts of those bright colors that I mentioned, and a lot more areas of the black, which would signify little to no activity in the brain area. Any questions so far about the basics of Alzheimer's? No. For those of you, go ahead.
My father has Alzheimer's, and I can't remember the name of the drug that he's on. A.R.C, thank you. How does this, I know it doesn't reverse anything, but what is it supposed to do? Is it the acetyl?
So basically, and I'm not a medical doctor. For those of you who came in late, my name is James Smith. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I used to work for the Alzheimer's Project. I was there for about 7 years. And so basically what the A.R.C is trying to do is trying to delay the symptoms of the disease, basically. So it's trying to slow down the progression of the disease. Like you mentioned, there aren't any cures for Alzheimer's disease, so it's not going to stop the disease in its track. It's just trying to slow down the progression of the disease basically from replicating and causing more damage to the brain.
It's not replacing, like people with depression or something might take an SSRI and that's supposed to serotonin or whatever.
Actually, it is kind of similar to that. It's supposed to kind of flood the brain with more neurotransmitters, so that there's more opportunity for the message to be received across the synapse. So that's basically what it is, in a very small nutshell. Again, very basic. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you have both parents, nobody in your family has Alzheimer's, what are your prospects of them? And why do some people get it and others don't? Is it the environment? Is it what they eat?
That is a great question, and one that is very prevalent. So Alzheimer's disease is basically a disease of aging. Let's see. I used to have some good jokes about this, and they're starting to run away from me. But basically, every human being has a 10% chance of developing Alzheimer's disease simply because you're a human being. The greatest number of people with Alzheimer's disease are individuals over the age of 65 plus. If you have family members that have had Alzheimer's disease, it increases your risk factor up to about 20%. So it's not an automatic that simply because mom and dad had Alzheimer's disease, you're going to have Alzheimer's disease as well. There's still not even a definitive way of diagnosing the disease. There's still not a known cause for the disease. So there's still research being done of why Alzheimer's disease happens, how it affects the brain, how it progresses even, because every human being reacts differently to the disease as well. So there, other risk factors are women have a higher tendency of having Alzheimer's disease. That's really a skewed number simply because women live longer than men. And so since women have a higher capacity of living longer, it makes them more prone to possibly developing the disease. Individuals with lower educational background have a higher risk because individuals with higher learning have what's called a cognitive reserve. So their brain has developed more ways of figuring things out, and so there are more pathways that are potentially open for those individuals. As far as prevention goes, there's still not a great way to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Really the only way to prevent Alzheimer's is not getting old. So if anybody figures that one out, that would be fantastic. The other things are, basically living your life as healthy as possible, like your doctors have told you all your life, to make sure that you get enough sleep at night, to make sure that you're exercising. It's recommended 30 minutes of exercise 3 times a week, simply as, going for a walk around your neighborhood. They've done studies on chocolates, on wine, on all kinds of things. And so for the chocolate, you'd have to eat about a pound of dark chocolate every single day to have enough of the, antioxidants. That's the word I'm looking for, to have the antioxidants. So with that, of course, I wouldn't mind eating that much chocolate, but I'd have high cholesterol, my fat levels would go up. It's not healthy. For wine, it'd be about 2 liters of red wine every day to get enough antioxidants. And I know some of us could definitely go for that as well. But of course, then you're talking about possibly cirrhosis of the liver and dementia induced by alcohol as well, which is another possibility too. So it's all about moderation. Moderation in everything that we do. So yes, making sure that yes, we're eating healthy, but sometimes indulging yourself in a good steak and things like that is always good too. So Whatever it is, it's basically moderation and a moderate lifestyle.
Traumatic head injury cause that?
There's definitely been a lot of research on traumatic brain injury over the last few years, and we've seen that especially in the NFL, in football, with a major awareness on concussions. And it certainly can. Any type of traumatic brain injury, whether it's a concussion, a stroke, even getting in a wreck, just bonking your head against the wall very hard, causes injury to your brain. And so, yes, we want to keep our brain as safe as possible. That's why we've got this huge skull that's meant to be a protector for our brain. So, yes, definitely wear your helmet when you're riding your bicycle and all that kind of fun stuff. Sir.
Like in my father's case, he had kind of a mild dementia back in the early 2000s, and it was really when my mother passed away in 2012. They lived out west. I hadn't gone out there about a year and a half, and that's when my father he was diagnosed with dementia. So I'm not even certain it's like I'm sure a physical injury could cause it, but when we talked to the neurologist, he said, more than likely they were married 46 years, and I'm the only child. And, Dad was all alone for a week or two, and it's just, that emotional trauma
Yes.
led to this significant decline. It's gotten worse ever since. But what do you make of that?
Absolutely. In my time when I was at the Alzheimer's Project, anytime families, always had a difficult time first kind of recognizing the onset of it, because it can be very difficult to identify at the very beginning. Because in the beginning, a person is still able to do a lot of things for themselves. And I'll jump to my next slide and kind of show you how the progression of the disease works. So as we look at this, to the right, as we move down and to the right, this is the disease progressing. And so at the very beginning of the stage, a person's able to still do pretty much everything for themselves. They're able to eat and walk and groom themselves and dress themselves, find their belongings, travel alone. But they're starting to have difficulty with the short-term memories, the things that just recently happened. And that's kind of how the disease works. It starts by affecting those short-term memories while the long-term memories stay intact. So if you ask mom and dad, what'd you have for breakfast? What'd you have for lunch yesterday? They might have difficulty remembering those things, but you start talking about your childhood. You start talking about their work history, things like that, the favorite places that they traveled. They're still able to remember those things in the very early stages. As the disease progresses, they're going to need more and more assistance remembering those things and remembering how to do those specific activities, as we move down and to the right. This is a slide from 1998, and it's still pretty accurate. Even with all of the advancements and research that's gone on, this is still something that we do continue to see. Yes, sir?
Does that mean that that's when you lose it, or that's, is that range?
Yeah, so there's a range. The disease can affect anyone from as long as 8 to 10 years. That's kind of the average. But you've seen some individuals be affected very quickly, and within 2 years, they're having difficulties. There's been individuals as long as 20 years that have had the disease. So it really has a major difference for each individual. The disease affects every individual differently. Just like you and I are all different in our makeup and our personalities and things like that, the disease affects everyone differently as well. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I just think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but people, one thing I have in my head, people have patterns, especially the elderly, even younger people. But you put us out of our comfort zone, out of our pattern, and maybe more of this dementia can show itself.
Absolutely.
When it would be there, it's going to be magnified if, say, they're no longer in their own home, they move to a assisted living facility, or they have an operation, have to spend extended time somewhere else, or even if they move to a new environment.
Absolutely.
So we get in certain patterns, we move out of them, and that can really magnify the issue.
Absolutely. Anytime you introduce what could be called a catastrophic event, like you mentioned, moving away from your house, losing a loved one, losing the ability to drive, losing the ability to do things, when we see those catastrophic events occur, it takes that person down a little bit more, and it is kind of like what you mentioned. The disease kind of, I don't know if it escalates or what, but it seems to intensify when we see those types of things. Yes.
My mom has aphasia, and she sounds like this. Why? Like, what's different from aphasia and dementia?
So aphasia is basically when a person struggles to find the correct words, right? And so sometimes that can be seen with a person with Alzheimer's disease. That's one of the symptoms of the disease, and it's basically the brain not being able to either recognize the word that's trying to come out or being able to correctly describe what it is. Right?
Yeah, but like she's not able to like find her keys when she just set them down, or like she can't remember like what she just had talked to someone on the phone or something. So like, I'm wondering like, is she sure like dementia or like?
It could be, or it couldn't be. The only way to know is to try and rule it out. And that's why, going to somewhere like the Memory Disorder Clinic at TMH is a good thing, because the only way to come up with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is to rule out anything and everything else. So it's a disease by rule out. So they have to rule out medical issues. They have to rule out past traumatic history, things like that, and other types of dementias as well. So it's a very thorough process, a very lengthy process, but it can definitely help to figure out exactly what it is that you're facing, because Alzheimer's disease is different from Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. It's different from any and every other type of dementia, and that's why it's important to have a thorough diagnosis to figure out what exactly it is that's causing the person to have these mental issues. So another hand over here.
I mean, and in the grand scheme of things, it's like, okay, there's no cure, and I could accept, like my dad having it.
Mm-hmm.
My worry is like my mom taking care of my dad because they live so far away, and it's like, you're on the phone and trying to deal with this,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see where my dad is, and it's all over the board, but,
Right.
and it's like when I talk to him on the phone, if I sit there and say, oh, you repeated it, he's quick to say, here, talk to your mom. And
Right.
he gets off the phone. So now I learned I love listening to his voice, so I don't even worry about it anymore. And
Right.
I just listen to the same story
Right.
6 times.
Yes.
But I hear his voice. But it's like I can see my mom, like, I go, my God, this is going to kill my mom trying to take care of him and she won't let anyone help her.
Mm. That's a difficult one, and unfortunately, that is something that I saw very frequently during my time at the Alzheimer's Project.
But I mean,
Yeah.
Is this painful? I mean, I don't see my dad in pain,
Right.
except he gets frustrated because he can't do something.
It doesn't seem to be painful, at least in the way that I saw it. I think the most pain is the the pain of the family, seeing their loved one go down this road, that psychological pain. But as far as the Alzheimer's patient, most of the time they don't even recognize that it's happening to themselves, especially once they get kind of to the middle and later stages. They're just literally in their own world. And all they can remember is the past. So present isn't really there, and the future is definitely not there. So they're basically living in their own past, their own memories is what they have left, which is why they remember those stories so well. And the stories that you hear are the stories that have that strong emotional tie, whether it's happiness or sadness, pain, fear. Those memories seem to be ingrained a lot stronger than the run-of-the-mill, I was at my office on this day. That's why we don't hear those stories. You hear the stories of, your wedding day, the birth of your children, a significant milestone for a child or for yourself. Those are the things that, for all of you, when you heard those words, they came up for you as well. You remembered your wedding day. You remembered the birth of your children, things like that, because they're so ingrained. But if I asked you what you were doing on, June 3rd of 2000, unless that's a significant day for you, it's not a significant day for me. I have no idea. Let's see, it would have been summer of going into my junior year of high school, so I was probably working at Cypress Gardens or something. There's no telling.
If I could say one thing to gentleman, I think you're right to worry about your mom.
Absolutely.
I didn't know, I faced the same kind of situation. My folks were in California, and my mom had cancer, and I'd gone out there several times to help her get through the surgeries, and, I've got a career, and I live here. And she passed away, and what I found, we bought a new house, reconfigured it, so Dad had downstairs. It was largely in a wheelchair, but he could still move at that point. But it got to a place, and this is where I think he's correct, it's heartbreaking, and it also ties into what you said. You wonder about the decisions you make for your patient with Alzheimer's. We had to send Dad to an ALF, and I won't even go into the battles I've had with these people over his care, but I wonder, having that dilemma, and I think about it every day, I pray about it every day, because I don't know if I made the right decision. We just got to a place where he kept falling. It's 3 in the morning, I'd hear tapping, instead of saying, hey, Rich, I need help. His cognitive function wasn't there. We were calling EMS at 3 in the morning, we couldn't lift him. And it just, his medications, he's diabetic, he couldn't control, he couldn't read the stuff, he couldn't, think to what would be easy for you and me, 5 units versus 10, he couldn't do it. And it's a heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking dilemma. And like I said, I struggle with it every day. And my father's probably at that place somewhere between the 10 and the 5. He's more or less stopped eating. And, we can't figure out why. It's there's nothing else wrong. He's not, So, my only advice is, look out after your mom. And,
I feel so guilty that I go, my God, I'd rather have my dad die so my mom could live, because it's like he's already dead. There's times I'm talking to him, and he's like, who are you? And I'm like, I feel like he died already, because he doesn't even know who I am.
Right.
And other days he does. And I'm like, what the heck is going on?
Exactly. That's dementia going on. You have those, back and forth, good days versus bad days, and then all of a sudden it turns from good days to good moments, back and forth. One of the most startling statistics that I ever saw with Alzheimer's disease didn't even equate to the person with the disease. It was actually the caregiver. 60% of the time, the caregiver of the person with Alzheimer's, not to alarm you, but the caregiver passes away before the person with Alzheimer's, because this is a 24/7, 365-day stress-induced job with no pay, no benefits, and unless you have usually family around you that can provide additional assistance, or you're open to having individuals come into the house to provide assistance, whether it's from a program where a CNA comes in, or even a volunteer to come in and sit with you, it's extremely difficult. And there are programs, thankfully, in Tallahassee that do provide that assistance. There are numerous home health care agencies. There's the Alzheimer's Project, which has numerous opportunities for respite, which are a huge help to the caregivers, because it gives them time to go and do the things that they need to do. To go take a nap because they haven't been able to sleep. To go to the restaurant with a friend that they haven't been able to see in a couple of years. Or even go grocery shopping. So it's very important that you remember it takes a village not only to raise a kid, but to also, take care of a person with Alzheimer's and dementia and aging. Yes?
You had made the comment that this disease tends to magnify personality traits. Is it possible for it to make somebody paranoid or angry or almost hallucinate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's basically living in their own world by their own rules. So Hallucinations definitely do occur, seeing things that aren't there, believing things that aren't true, paranoia, absolutely. And we're kind of getting to the point where I think Father Tom wanted me to get to, which is how do you deal with these things in kind of a Catholic perspective? You deal with these things however the person needs. Yes, we have a very strong faith, and we all live by it. But you also have to think of how is this going to affect the rest of my day, the rest of my time as well. And so, for example, one of the most common things that you're going to hear is, where's my mom and my dad? My father-in-law has dementia. He's in an assisted living facility out in Monticello. Just yesterday, we went and visited him. Where's my dad? Well, his dad's been dead since the 60s. If we were to tell him that, there's a couple of different ways that he could react to it. For him, it could be the first time that he's ever heard that news, because for an Alzheimer's patient, their memories have gone back so far that they can't remember what happened. So he could, if we told him, well, Dad's been dead for 1965, he could be sad, he could be angry, he could have all of those emotions that you feel when you have that knowledge of, oh my gosh, my dad is dead. Or you can tell a little white lie. You can say, well, Dad's not here right now, but maybe we'll see him a little bit longer, in a little while. Which, as we believe in heaven, we believe that, we're going to see our family again. It's not necessarily a white lie, it's just stretching the truth. Another thing that you'll also see, the individuals that went to the respite rooms for the Alzheimer's Project. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon after lunch, they were ready to go home. They'd been there since 9 o'clock, and the day ends about 3. So rather than telling them, your loved one's going to be picking you up at 3 o'clock, if we tell those individuals, they're going to be looking at their watch until 3 o'clock, wondering, where is my person? Why aren't they here? So rather than giving them the exact information, just stretch it a little bit. They'll be here in a little while. There were times where I told an individual, I actually just got off the phone with your wife. She's finishing up at the grocery store. She'll be here in a little while. I never made a phone call to a family member asking them where they were. But it's one way to kind of relieve the stress of that individual, to let them know that, one, I know who their individual is that they're looking for, that I've been in contact with them, and that you're in a safe location. And then we distract and divert their attention away with something else. So we would play bingo, we would do arts and crafts, we would do music, anything to get their mind away from that major concern of, I'm lost, I don't know where I am, and I don't know who these people are. So you distract and divert their attention with something that will help to alleviate that stress. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to put in a personal thing that happened. I remember walking in Walmart with my mother, and she was pushing the shopping cart, and she turned to me and said, I better be getting home. My mother will be worried about me. And at the time, I didn't understand this, and I felt the need to set the record straight. And I said, Mom, your mother's been dead for many years. And it was like the first time she heard it. And I saw, how distraught she was over that, what I had just said. And I spoke to, you remember Michelle Bourgeois?
Mm-hmm.
She explained to me, just like you said, redirect, go along with it, say, yes, I'm sure your mom will be worried about you, and we will do this, and then change it, the subject, and go on to something else,
Mm-hmm.
and it usually will pass.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't understand that at the time, and I felt sorry that I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know.
Right.
So.
Absolutely. And speaking to the hallucinations, and I'll get to you in just a moment. For hallucinations, when there are spiders crawling down the wall, or there's squirrels trying to get the nuts, it's better to live in that person's reality than to deny it. Because for that individual, they've lost the ability to think and reason. as I mentioned earlier. So they can't understand that, no, there's no spiders there. There's nothing crawling on them. There's not snakes on the ground. There's not water coming from the toilet. For that individual, that is a real moment, and nothing you can say will ever be able to help them reason that it's not happening. So it's better to go along with it and do what you would do if that were actually happening. One of our caregivers, when I was at the Alzheimer's Project, at one of the support groups, told a story of how, last night my husband woke up and he thought that, all of the pipes had broken in our house and the whole house was being flooded. So rather than, just saying, no, honey, go back to sleep, that's not happening, she said, well, there's not a lot we can do about it now. I'll go out to the pump out in the front yard, turn off the water to the house, and we'll call a plumber in the morning. And so because she took care of the situation and made the water stop, it put into his mind, this is someone who's going to take care of me. A lot of times it's also important to try and figure out what's the underlying feeling as well, because that person's in crisis. And so it's important to identify the feeling and try to help that person get through that fear, that scared moment, to help figure out, a little bit further what's going on. I'm going to get to you first.
My mother married young at 19, just out of finishing school, and lost her husband within 2 years. So my dad married a woman who was 4 years older than he was.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad always protected my mother, I think, that way. My mother was reserved, my dad was outgoing, hardworking guy. She was an athletic woman that played the piano.
Mm-hmm.
But we were always reserved. And then they lived here for the longest part of their life. They lived in Tallahassee.
Okay.
Lived in 6 or 8 parts of the country. And Wendy and I are eldest children of our families. And they lived a few blocks from us. And I must say, I'm a physician, but observing my own parents, I had blind spots. Poor vision, then these visual hallucinations occurred. And I would eat with my parents and notice little subtle things, but my dad never talked about it. He was great about just taking care of his wife, my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad had a minor operation, had some complications, had to go in the hospital, stay in the hospital. So Wendy, correct me, but Wendy was the daytime caregiver for my mom, and I was the nighttime caregiver, still working full time.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it really hit me in the face. I heard my mother wake up every 20 minutes and want to go to the bathroom, ask for a cup of coffee in the middle of the night, and then call my father, but she really couldn't recognize him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the bedroom across the hall, and I would talk to her, and she'd say, "Who are you?" I'd say, "I'm your oldest child."
Mm-hmm.
And I realized she looked at me like she had no idea who I was.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, my father, who had promised he would never put my mother in a nursing home, because she'd asked that years before, seeing a friend in a difficult situation. I realize now why my dad said, "Don't buy me any more books." Book lover, reader. I can't read anymore. I thought his eyes were gone.
Mm.
And then he started to lose weight and sort of shrink in size. And I realized how much he couldn't read because he had no time to read. When he would tell us that.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed he couldn't see anymore. And then I realized he was getting smaller and smaller.
Mm.
From playing 2 years of college football in the 30s to being an FBI agent and shrinking down to this little man. And so we had to say, "Dad, you're not going to put her in a nursing home. We're going to find some place for her. I'm going to do it
Mm-hmm.
for you and my sisters." Yeah, it was just amazing how we missed that for a long time.
Yeah.
But it was the best thing for him because he lived many years longer. Once we could take him out of the direct caregiver phase.
Right.
And he lived near her, and he could walk 200 feet to see my mom as often as he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
He did not have to do the everyday care of them.
Right.
So it's real.
Yes, and it's a tough decision, and it's hard when you've made that promise to your loved one. I'm never going to put you into a facility. That's one of the hardest ones because it is difficult, and especially when we're talking about a spouse providing that care as well. Because again, as the person ages and as the disease progresses, they're going to need more and more assistance. And with that more and more assistance, it's even standing up from a seated position. It's putting on clothes. It's bathing. So you're carrying and holding a person that's anywhere from 100 to 200 pounds, depending on the person. And, even though they were a football player and an FBI agent and, all of those things, a very strong person themselves, they're not spring chickens themselves anymore either. And so maybe their bones are a little bit more brittle. They're not as strong as they used to be. And it does take a wear on the body. So it is very important to at least be open to the idea of accepting help, even if it's from children or, from strangers. One of the things that I always found is as the disease progresses, the person with the disease kind of sees their primary caregiver as an authority figure. And they're kind of reverted back into a childlike place as well. And so if you remember when you were a child and you had an authority figure, such as a parent, telling you to do something, I don't want to do that. I don't want to clean my room. I don't want to go take a shower. It was, I don't want to do that because you're that person in charge. But whenever you went over to a friend's house, a grandparent's house, something like that, it was, how can I help you, Grandma? I'd love to help you cook today. And your parents were thinking, who is this kid? That was me. And that's kind of how we see that with Alzheimer's disease is, that authority figure, that primary caregiver has a lot of, pushback from that individual with Alzheimer's disease. But if you get a volunteer in, if you get a home health aide in, they're a little bit more easier to work with that individual. And it's really kind of interesting to see. They're more willing to work with that stranger as opposed to the person that they should recognize. So yet another reason to potentially be open to at least the idea of accepting help. Do you have another question?
Yeah, and see, that's our dilemma, because
Right.
we're trying to tell my mom we gotta do this. And like, my dad had to go to the hospital, and it was like every 5 minutes, when am I going home? When am I going home? And my mom's at like, well, how can I put him in place if he acts like this, like that's his,
Mm-hmm.
and he's doing exactly what you just said, like resisting. I mean, he's been a diabetic, and she's given him his medicine every day for 20 years, and now he thinks she's trying to poison him.
Right.
And he's mad at her, and now we're worried, like, he's gonna hurt her because he thinks she's trying to poison him with these pills.
Yeah.
And we're just like, oh, I don't know what to do. They're so
Yeah.
far away, it's just like,
It's-
I'm either sitting there like, I just wanna put blinders up and not think about it, or
Yeah.
I feel guilty that I'm not there.
Absolutely. And being a long distance caregiver is one of the hardest ones because, you like you mentioned earlier, you have those moments when you're on the phone with that person and they're talking to you just fine. You're having a great conversation. They're remembering things, but I can almost guarantee you as soon as they get off the phone with you, he's going to ask your mom, who was I just talking to?
And see, my sister's there, and then we
Right.
got that battle of, no, there's nothing wrong with that, nothing, and you're like, well, you're the sort of the primary caregiver, I gotta go along with what you're doing,
Right.
and she's resistant to, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Can an Alzheimer's person hurt somebody mortally?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If you go back to those hallucinations and paranoia, and they're, thinking that this person's trying to harm them, if there's knives, if there's guns, if there's any type of weapon, especially with a former FBI agent that I knew that had guns in the house, he pulled a gun on his wife because he didn't recognize her.
Even when I went out
So-
with my wife, when my mom passed away, my father never raised a hand to my mother, and I can't ever even think of any time when he swatted me on the rear end if I did something wrong. He's the most gentle man in the world. We're out there 2 or 3 days trying to get stuff moved so he could come stay with us, and he grabbed my wife and went after her, grabbed her by the wrist, pushed her. I was like, Dad, what are you doing?
Mm.
And, I was so uncharacteristic for a man I've known all my life and who raised me, 50 years. I didn't even recognize that.
Right.
Something, just switched. And so
Yeah.
that's another one of these things that just, it's kind of baffling. I don't know where your folks are at.
Well, they're in Chicago, and,
Chicago?
yeah.
There should be a lot of resources, I know.
Well, and that's, the problem is like my sister's there, and she comes once a week and does stuff, but it's like you mention any of these resources, and it's like, no, you know, and it's like, not only am I fighting my mom, and she's like, no, I don't need any help, I can handle this, and then my sister's like, no, there's nothing wrong. And you're like,
Yeah.
clearly there's something.
No, denial is strong. I mean, my father just wouldn't verbalize what was going on. He just said, I got through the depression, a large family, I got through World War II, I did this, and he just used to not complaining.
Yeah.
Pain,
It's a tough decision to make.
Pain
Yeah,
was not in his
yeah.
vocabulary. He never had pain. He just had discomfort.
Right.
And that kind, but it carried over into that, and every day in the hospital now, I see this, family members who live in denial of the reality of the situation.
Is there one race more prone to it than other races?
No, it affects anybody at any time.
I've never seen a patient with Alzheimer's, it's never been in my family. It's like-
Right.
But I hear a lot of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's
It's an embarrassment too sometimes.
absolutely.
That's why they don't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
All that's going on in the generation that they grew up in.
I was just about to say that. Absolutely.
You kept it all right here.
They're called the quiet generation for a reason.
We deny HIV disease in our families, and some people deny dementia in their families.
Absolutely.
So I use the term age-related cognitive deficit, you know, because you say dementia, the conversation shuts down.
Absolutely. It's a very taboo
My
word.
mother's not demented,
Yeah.
and it's clear, so you say, well, just an age-related cognitive deficit or decline.
Mhm.
Something's, it's a euphemism, but basically it's, we recognize it. And our people just, that's straight, like, no, not gonna talk about it. We don't accept that.
Right. Sir, I had saw you.
Speaking to like your sister's situation, I kind of feel similarly. You know, my parents live literally right down the street, and they're declining, they're elderly. And, you know, Dad's got Parkinson's, and Mom's kind of exhibiting the beginning signs of Alzheimer's. I've seen it before. But just like I said earlier, if you take them out of that environment, I mean, that starts a huge decline that none of them really want. But at the same time, Mom complains about taking care of Dad with Parkinson's. I found him the other day. He was face first on the couch and couldn't move, couldn't get up. So I physically, you know, I'm a little larger than my mom. I physically had to lift him up off the couch. And it literally took 45 minutes. We're sweating all over each other. There's little he could do. I mean, I had him up on. So obviously my mom couldn't do it. But I would have told her, hey, if I'm not available, next time you got to call 911. But
Yeah.
at some point, we got to make a decision for a facility for him. But Mom is much more open to that than Dad ever would be.
Right. And actually, you don't have to call 911. There's a non-emergency number for the fire department that will be able to provide lift assistance. So yeah, so there is free lift assistance through the fire departments. They'll come out and, you know, definitely.
Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
But we even, like, because I've offered, like, okay, we'll figure out a way to find a house with a mother-in-law apartment, but
Mhm.
it's like you move my dad out of the apartment, it's like, where am I, you know, and it's
Mhm.
like, well, how's he gonna move in with one of us
Yeah.
if he gets, like, paranoid, and he goes to my sister's house, we're like, oh, good, he could stay there, and the whole time, he's just like, where'd she go, where'd she go?
Absolutely.
And it drives them crazy, so they're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, you know, and then he starts accusing everyone of stealing stuff from him.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's another thing that you definitely see is, you know, where's the good china, because it's not here anymore. And, you know, sometimes it's because they hid it and they don't remember where they hid it. You know, there was a gentleman who, you know, buried his dentures in a potted plant in the house because he thought someone was going to take his teeth, and then, you know, the wife didn't find it until after he had passed away. And so, you know, it's things like that. It's, you know, oftentimes those hidden things aren't found until that person's, you know, not in the house anymore, and, you know, they stuffed it under the drawers, and because, you know, again, going back to the generation, if you had something of value, you had to make sure that it wasn't going to be taken from you. So, you know, there's definitely that.
You know, one
And-
thing you might consider, my wife works for Covenant Care here, she's been there about a year, and they do hospice care. and my father's not imminent, although they've said he's declining pretty rapidly, but he's had hospice care for the last 5-6 months, and it has been a blessing from above, because they've come in and they've been able to deal with some of these issues, and I know they go out to people's homes as well. So like what he was saying earlier about, sometimes you just have a different person, or you play the game that way. Your dad thinks that your mom's trying to poison him with metformin or something. Maybe if you had an organization like that could send out a nurse and help with that. I don't know how you play it with your sister, but sometimes you can get creative. There are resources. They're hard to get a hold of. We had people coming in like, visiting angels type things. They're not typically able to even give the medications, right? Because at least here in Florida, because of state laws.
Right.
But if you can reach out and a place like the Alzheimer's Project, there's an analog to that in Chicagoland. Maybe you can contact them, get creative, and see if that might be able to help. There's organizations out there. I certainly never knew about any of this 2 years, 3 years ago. But
There should be a program called the Area Agency for Aging, something like that, where they would have, basically it's an information referral hotline that can provide assistance to, any number of different things, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit in those areas. And, their primary function is to provide assistance for aging individuals. Those are, I know they're here in Florida throughout, and I'm pretty sure that they're throughout all of the United States. So, those are always good resources or things like that. For those of you who are here locally, again, the Alzheimer's Project is a fantastic opportunity to learn more, whether it's going in for one-on-one individual counseling and education. They have support groups, kind of like what happened here. You never know what's going to happen in a presentation, and you go with what the crowd wants. And so I'm glad that you all felt free to be open with each other. And that's the great thing about a support group, is you learn from each other. You use each other's experiences to figure out, maybe that'll work for me. It's always better to get ideas of things that have worked for other individuals and see if it works. You want to try and be as open as possible to all the possibilities. Because what works for your loved one may not work tomorrow, may not work the next day. But you just keep going with, for, as I mentioned earlier, to distract and divert their attention to do those types of things. You go back to what they loved, what they felt most passionate about. So if it was talking about, FBI, if it was talking about Florida State football, if it was, rock and roll music, or, the Cubbies are going to the World Series. Hopefully he's not a White Sox fan.
Well, you want the biggest dilemma we got is to keep them out of the car.
Oh, yeah. The
And
keys
he
are,
said-
yeah.
He basically told us, you take away my driver's license, I'm gonna kill myself.
That's a tough one. And that's,
And what do we, it's like,
yeah.
we're
The-
scared to death.
The
because
keys are the toughest one. Yeah.
The best thing that ever happened is he fell and broke his wrist, and he couldn't drive
Right.
for a couple weeks.
Absolutely.
But then it got better, and he pushed my mom aside,
Yeah. Just
it's like this is his manhood.
absolutely. That's exactly what that is. It's independence. It's, I can go wherever the heck I want to go when I want to go there, and nobody's going to have to take me. That's always the toughest one. And, there was a former caregiver that I saw. She let her husband drive for 3 years with the disease. Absolutely. If any of you have to go to service, please feel free to go. And it's always the toughest one. And it's always the guys that have the biggest difficulty with it. It seems like females don't have as big of an issue with it. But for guys, absolutely. And I know that if it ever happened for me, I would throw all heck to it as well, because I drive everywhere.
But it was like,
So, yeah.
He got in an accident. They took his driver's license away, and my sister fought to get the license back.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, why did you do that for?
Yeah.
Well, he's gonna kill himself if he doesn't. And they're like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, what do I do now?
Yeah,
know
you
what?
can't.
Don't be too hard on your sister.
Yeah.
Because I was right where she probably is 4 years ago when my mother passed away. I was in denial. I'm like, this isn't my father. There's something else going. He can't have Alzheimer's. We don't have any, history of this in the family. He's a good guy. I mean, I just, in all the sort of dysfunctional things that were happening, I just denied him. I said, this can't be true. This just can't be.
Yeah.
This is not my father. So, it's taken me a long time to kind of get to the place where I've had to say, okay, this is reality, and maybe your sister's just in a different place.
Right. And it could also be a family thing. My wife's grandmother never drove. She never drove. She never learned how to drive. She never got her driver's license because she was afraid of it. It could be a generational thing. The man drives, the woman's the passenger. So, it's definitely a difficult thing. Some of the things that caregivers have done in the past is give an old pair of car keys that don't work for the car anymore, saying that the car's in the shop and, it'll be ready soon.
In my case, I just started driving my dad's truck. I parked
Yeah.
mine elsewhere. I said,
Yeah.
sorry, Dad, I got to take the truck today.
Absolutely. Yes.
I have a suggestion called the area of advanced directives, of planning ahead for this sort of thing. And when you see this happening, the reality is every day in the hospital I run into somebody who has a incurable disease and they have no plan
Yes.
for their loved ones. If the patient has capacity to say what they want, we like to listen to them.
Yes.
Many patients have lost their capacity for decision making, and it goes to the spouse or a child or a partner. And sometimes it's difficult if they've never had the conversation.
Right.
Some folks have, and the suggestions or the goals of the patient are ignored and
Yes.
neglect for other reasons. So I would say it's great to have a conversation about an advanced directive.
Yes.
And then also about some interventions that are more burdensome than beneficial. The combination, this often happens where a person is demanding, and the caregiver will say, this person, my dad used to eat, but he had some help. Then he began to eat more slowly. Then I let the food in his mouth. We could eat a meal in a half an hour, then it took an hour, then it took an hour and a half or two. Then he would just, I put the food in his mouth, he would swallow it.
Right.
And I can't stand to see my dad starve. So does the feeding gastroscopy, put in a surgical procedure, does that lessen the situations and lessen the burden? And most times it doesn't.
Right.
In fact, sometimes it causes more problems than it's worth, because it sounds great to us that we can put in this many calories of tube feeding in water, we can calculate what a person needs, but they just don't seem to put it to good use.
Right.
And then there are issues where a person is not walking around and sitting up, and they're lying down, and what you put in their stomach ends up in their lungs because they're supine or perhaps.
Right.
So these things are something that you want to talk about ahead of time.
Right.
But that's the Catholic perspective.
Well, that's-
You never deny food, but then you're
Yeah.
like, my mom's praying, she's like, God, you took half his mind, why didn't you just take them all? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Well,
And she's really religious,
If
and
there's,
she feels
if there's a
guilty.
chance, if there's a chance of recovery,
Yeah.
traumatic head injuries in young people, brain tumor surgeries,
Yeah.
cancer of the head and neck, there are things where tube feeding works. It may work, but it may not. But in advanced dementia, tube feedings often bear more burdensome than beneficial. And,
Right.
and Catholic theology, ethics recognizes that there are times when it will do no good and it may indeed impose certain burdens. It's a very gray area, but it's
Yeah.
sort of requires prayer, discernment, and counseling with your pastor and an ethicist. But it does happen where people have that, where we can prolong the dying process by doing these things, or we think we can.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you do that with advanced dementia, you don't prolong the dying process to keep their life at weeks or months longer. You actually hasten their death by intervening in that way.
Absolutely. And these are the tough questions that are very difficult to answer because everyone answers them differently as well. So I think my time is up.
Well, I
But
appreciate it.
absolutely, if any of you would like to stay and talk to me afterwards, I'll be here as long as you need me. So thank you all for coming and being a part of this. And again, reach out to the Alzheimer's Project or reach out to 211. We're here to help as well. So thank you all so much.